My husband left me abroad with $0, no visa, no lease. 14 days later, police issued a 100-meter order, yet he still waited outside my apartment. They say love is supposed to make you feel safe. For 6 years I thought I had that, until the man I trusted most vanished overnight, leaving me stranded in a foreign country with nothing but a half-empty fridge. And now, I had to survive on my own, in a place where every street was unfamiliar, and every choice could mean starting over. Or falling apart. To understand that night, you need to know how it started. I have been married to Alden for 6 years. We met while I was working locally, and he was the lovely person who always appeared to be so protective, until I discovered the hard way that his protection was actually control. We moved abroad 2 years ago for his job. He assured me, "I'll take care of everything, you won't have to worry about anything." I quit my steady job, sold my car, and abandoned my family. I trusted him. When we arrived, everything seemed okay at first. I was looking for work, but Alden kept telling me, "Don't rush. I make enough for both of us." Then, anytime I bought something simple, like coffee, he'd make comments like, "Must be nice to spend money you didn't earn." He declined to include my name on the lease because it is simply easier that way. He stated it was only temporary, but every time I mentioned it, he'd laugh and say, "Why do you need your name there? You're with me." When I made friends, he'd complain they were negative influences who didn't care about me. He wanted me to stay at home so he knew I was safe. We had a quarrel 4 months ago when I asked him to help me with some paperwork so I could apply for a work visa. He asked, "Why do you need to work? Are you saying I can't provide for you? Or are you planning to leave me once you have money?" I explained that I simply wanted independence. He snapped. "If you wanted independence, you shouldn't have married me." Things became tight after that. He would go for hours without telling me where he was. He began locking his phone. One evening I returned home from the grocery store to find some of his belongings missing. His work bag, a suitcase, and a few clothes. I called him, but he did not respond. Hours later, he sent a simple message, "I returned home. Don't worry, you'll be fine." I froze. I was in a foreign nation, my visa was based on his sponsorship, and my name was not on anything. I inquired what he meant. He said, "You'll figure it out. You're resourceful." There was no explanation or discussion. He had purchased a flight back to our native country without informing me. When I tried calling again, he left voice messages like, "Stop acting like a victim. I left because you're impossible to live with, and you always complain about being stuck. Now you can see what it's like to actually be on your own." This horrified me. I had enough money for around 2 weeks of meals. I called the landlord, but he told me that because my name was not on the lease, I had no legal rights. I pleaded Alden to at least allow me some time to figure out my visa and living situation. He added, "That's your problem now. I'm not your babysitter." He told common acquaintances I was crazy and emotional, and that if I truly loved him, I'd definitely follow him crying. I realized I had 2 options, break down or fight. I went to the embassy to explain my predicament. They introduced me to a local women's support group. They assisted me with temporary lodgings and legal counsel. I began cleaning houses to get extra money, while Alden sent me infrequent texts, swinging between feigned concern and insults. "I hope you're eating. You're too sensitive to survive out there. See, I told you you'd be fine without me. You didn't need me after all, unless you did. When you're ready to apologize, maybe I'll think about letting you come back." The worst aspect was that he never inquired if I was safe. I eventually obtained my own modest apartment last month, thanks to one of the women I met. Then Alden phoned, not texted, but called. He continued, "I think we should try again. I'll send for you. It's not the same here without you." When I didn't immediately respond, he added, "Don't be stubborn. You know you can't build a life there without me." I laughed for the first time in years. I truly laughed. I reminded him, "You left me here with nothing. I've built everything I have now without you. Why would I go back to someone who abandoned me?" He began ranting, accusing me of destroying our marriage over a misunderstanding. Then he reverted to gaslighting. "I didn't abandon you. I gave you freedom. You just didn't know how to handle it." I hung up. I blocked him everywhere. I shared a picture of my new apartment online a few days ago. It's simply a small kitchen with sunlight streaming in through the windows. Friends messaged that it looked cozy. A mutual acquaintance informed me Alden saw it and became enraged because I appeared too pleased. That's when I realized I'd truly won. He left me believing I would crumble without him. Instead, I learned how to stand on my own in a situation where I had nothing. I'm now staying overseas, my visa situation is nearly resolved, and I have consistent cleaning clients. I roam the streets without anyone watching my every step. I can sip coffee without feeling ashamed about spending his money. And I sleep soundly, knowing that no one will vanish in the night and leave me adrift again. Yesterday, while heading home from work, I felt someone following me. I turned a corner and spotted Alden. He continued, "You didn't think I'd let you go that easily, did you?" My blood sank, and I could smell his fragrance, the same expensive thing he always wore. I clutched my keys between my fingers, as I had learned in the shelter's self-defense training. My heart was beating so hard that I feared it was going to burst. I backed away slowly, toward the corner shop where Mr. Halden always worked in the evenings. Alden moved closer, and his smile made my skin crawl. I turned and dashed into the store, the small bell above the door sounding like an alarm. Mr. Halden looked up from his newspaper, and his pleasant smile faded as he saw my face. Alden entered behind me, all charm and phony concern. He informed Mr. Halden that he was my husband, that we had a minor argument, and that he had come all the way to take me home. Mr. Halden looked at me and inquired in terrible English if I wanted assistance. I couldn't speak, but I was able to pronounce the Czech word for police that Linnea taught me. Mr. Halden immediately grabbed his phone and moved between me and Alden. Alden's good guy disguise dropped, and he screamed at me to stop causing a disturbance. He stated we were married and only needed to communicate. He lunged for my arm, but Mr. Halden held him aside while shouting rapidly into his phone. 2 police officers arrived in less than 5 minutes because the station was only 3 blocks away. Alden went right back into worried husband mode, whipping out his phone to show us our marriage certificate. He continued repeating it was all a misunderstanding, and that his wife was perplexed. The cops looked at me, and I pulled out my residence permit with trembling hands. I showed them Alden's messages on my phone, in which he stated I'd figure it out and that I was resourceful. The younger officer's face hardened as he read them. They requested someone who could speak better English, and Detective Stefan Brenner came 20 minutes later. He immediately separated us, leading Alden to one corner while another cop remained with me. I showed Stefan everything, the women's shelter paperwork, my work papers from Selena's cleaning agency, and screenshots of all Alden's texts. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I was constantly dropping papers. They drove us each to the station in different automobiles. I sat in a small room alone, hearing Alden's voice through the thin walls. He was telling them I was unstable, that I had refused to come home with him, and that he was simply a concerned spouse. I texted Marcia using fingers that could barely type the words. She arrived in less than an hour with a huge folder of papers. She had copies of my shelter intake documents, images of me appearing half-starved when I initially came, and staff comments about Alden abandoning me. She sat next to me, holding my hand as we waited. Stefan returned after what felt like an eternity, with a frustrated expression on his face. He stated that Alden had booked a 2-week stay at the Hotel Imperial, and they couldn't legally force him to leave Prague. They had cautioned him about stalking laws, and instructed him to stay at least 100 meters away from me. Alden would have to go to court if he wanted to fight it, but for the time being, it was all they could do. The station door blasted open, and Selena dashed in, her cleaning outfit still on and her face flushed with rage. She grasped my shoulders and examined me as if she were looking for injuries before turning to Stefan. "This man left her with nothing in a foreign country," she told me. Stefan nodded and explained the problem, while Selena's hands remained on my shoulders. She grabbed me aside and informed me I was going to stay with her and her husband, Henrik. I began to object, but she interrupted me with a glance that reminded me of my mother. We drove to her house in silence, while I looked in the mirrors for Alden's rented car. Selena's home was small but cozy, with photographs everywhere and the aroma of something cooking. Henrik emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel, and Selena swiftly talked to him in Czech. He nodded and went to get some blankets, while Selena led me to their spare room. That night I lay awake every hour, checking the locks on my bedroom door and jumping at every passing car. My phone buzzed with texts from strange numbers, and I knew Alden was acquiring fresh SIM cards. The messages repeatedly mentioned the necessity to discuss and the importance of not being emotional. I removed them and emailed Roland at the embassy, providing screenshots and updates on Alden's presence in Prague. The next morning, Henrik was already up, installing a surveillance camera near their front door, while Selena prepared breakfast. I assisted her in loading cleaning items into her van, while my phone continued to vibrate with new texts. Alden had found new numbers, and was texting me, stating I was still his wife, and that we needed to sort things out. Selena noticed my hands shaking and took the phone to check the texts. She contacted Stefan again while Henrik finished with the camera and us how to view the footage on our phones. That sudden apparition around the corner seemed extremely convenient. How long had Alden been tracking my movements to determine where I'd be strolling home from work? As we drove to our first cleaning assignment at an office building near the city center, I couldn't stop thinking about how he quickly tried to seduce Mr. Halden. I was sweeping the lobby when I noticed it through the glass doors. Alan's rental automobile parked across the street. He was seated in the driver's seat, looking at the skyscraper and shooting shots with his phone. My hands became so shaky that I dropped the mop handle and it fell against the floor. Selena dashed in and noticed where I was staring. She took out her phone to call the cops while I photographed Alden sitting there. Stefan arrived 20 minutes later, walked over to Alden's car, and we observed from inside. Alden rolled down his window, and I noticed him gesturing and pointing toward the structure. Stefan stood there for a long time chatting to him before forcing him to hand over his phone. Alden deleted something while Stefan watched, then started his car and slowly drove away. Stefan returned inside and reported that Alden claimed he was only sightseeing and happened to park there. The law required him to keep 100 meters away, but theoretically, the street was public property. That evening, Selena drove me back to her place, where I finally video phoned my sister Aireddit home. She began crying as soon as she saw my face and said me that Alden had called everyone. He had been telling family members that I had mental difficulties and needed professional care. Aireddit stated that our aunt believed him and constantly inquiring if I was taking medication. The following morning, Selena had to go to the women's shelter to meet with Linnea regarding another client. I stayed at home with Henrik, but Linnea called Selena's phone, sounding concerned. Alden had arrived at the shelter, asking about me and wanting to know where I was living. Linnea refused to let him in and contacted security, but Guy stood outside holding a cardboard sign. The sign read, "I'm sorry," in Czech, and he was telling passers-by that his wife had abandoned him. Some folks paused to hear his story about flying all the way to apologize. Security eventually forced him to leave, but not before numerous people got photos of him holding his sign. That afternoon, Roland called from the embassy with shocking news. Alden had filed an official complaint accusing me of stealing money from our joint account before he left Prague. Roland stated that the embassy required bank statements and paperwork to confirm the money was mine. While Roland was on the phone, I had to go through my inbox and look for old statements. The next day, Selena received 2 cancellation calls from her normal cleaning clients. They claimed they no longer needed servicing, but Selena felt something was amiss. She visited her business website and saw messages in the contact form from someone claiming to be my concerned husband. Alden had been writing to all of her clients, claiming that I was unstable and shouldn't be trusted in their homes. Selena contacted each customer again to explain, but 2 had already hired someone else. My phone vibrated with a text from Soraya, who resided in my previous apartment complex. She stated that a man claiming to be a relative of mine had been questioning other tenants about my schedule. He wanted to know what time I generally arrived home and if I was living alone now. The building manager had already warned him to leave once, but he kept returning. Soraya shared me a snapshot she took from her window of Alden holding a notebook near the building's door. 3 days passed before I could even consider returning to my Czech language sessions at the community center. I sat in the back row, trying to concentrate on verb conjugations, but my hand kept moving on its own, repeatedly penning the same 3 words in my notebook. He will not win. He will not win. He will not win. The pen squeezed so hard that it ripped through the paper in spots. Every time the door opened, my entire body clenched. A man stepped in late and I grabbed my phone, ready to contact Stefan, until I realized he was simply another student seeking for a seat. My students continued looking at me as I startled at every sound. The teacher asked if I was all right, and I nodded, but my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my pen twice. When class concluded, I quickly gathered my belongings and started for the door, but I came to a halt when I spotted him through the window. Alden stood outside the community center, holding a large bundle of red roses, as if we were on a romantic date. I fumbled with my phone as I called Stefan while backing away from the exit. Alden noticed me through the glass and grinned, holding out the flowers and pointing at them as if I should be glad about them. Stefan answered the second ring and told me to stay inside until he sent someone over. I watched Alden pace outside, staying just at the property line. When the police car arrived, Alden went backward down the street, keeping the exact 100-meter distance specified in the restraining order. The police couldn't do anything because Alden wasn't exactly breaking the law. He followed me all the way to the tram stop, counting his steps to stay legal, and those foolish roses remained in his palm. That night, my phone called with a number I couldn't recognize, but when I responded, it was Damien, Alden's brother. He seemed disturbed and stated Alden had called to beg him to wire money to Prague, which was strange. Damien wanted to know what was going on since something did not make up. When I told him about the restraining order and stalking, Damien went silent for a long time. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Alden was dismissed from his job 2 months ago for harassing a co-worker, 2 months ago when he was still sending me texts about how great he was doing without me. Damien claimed Alden had been living in his basement and borrowing money while between contracts. The next morning, Selena called me, crying. Her largest client, a property management business that handled half of the buildings we cleaned, had terminated their agreement. Someone sent them an anonymous email with screenshots claiming I had a criminal record for theft and fraud. The photographs were clearly false, but the harm had been done. Selena lost 40% of her business profits in a single email. She wasn't angry with me, but I could hear the worry in her voice about paying the rent and her other employees. That afternoon, Linnea scheduled an emergency meeting with Selena and Dr. Karina Vugt, a lawyer who specializes in harassment cases. We sat in Linnea's office, going over everything, recording each occurrence with dates and timings. Karina took notes on her laptop, asking detailed questions concerning the restraining order violations and slander. She stated that we had grounds for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit, but we needed additional evidence of the pattern. Selena handed her the email to her customer, and Karina immediately began writing cease and desist letters. During our meeting, my mother called 5 times. When I finally responded, she was sobbing so hard that I could barely understand her. Alden had given her images of himself standing outside my apartment building, gaunt and unkempt, stating he was attempting to rescue me from a dangerous area. He informed her that I had become involved with undesirable individuals and required assistance in returning home. My mother asked me to return with him, claiming he seemed so anxious and unhappy in the photos. She continued repeating he was still my husband and marriage entailed working through challenges together. I tried to explain about the stalking and harassment, but she only cried harder, wondering what I had done to cause him to behave this way. The following day things worsened. I was browsing my email when I discovered someone had accessed our old shared cloud storage account. Alden had downloaded every photo from our wedding, even the private ones from our honeymoon and holiday. The login originated from a Prague IP address. My palms were cold as I realized what he could do with those photographs. Karina applied for an immediate digital restraining order that afternoon, but we both understood the harm he could do before any legal protection kicked in. I couldn't eat or sleep while waiting for the photographs to appear online. Selena requested me to assist her clean a diplomatic property the next morning, claiming that the routine job would help calm my worries. The ambassador's wife was home and noticed I was distressed. While Selena cleaned upstairs, she offered me tea and asked if I was all right. Something about her gentle expression compelled me to tell her everything. She listened without judgment before telling me about her own departure from an abusive marriage 20 years ago. She jotted down the name of an international women's rights organization that had assisted her and stated that they had resources, even for situations that crossed boundaries. That afternoon, a homeless guy knocked on Selena's door, bringing a box. Inside was my old passport, which Alden had reported as lost 2 years ago, my grandmother's emerald jewelry, which he said was stolen during our relocation, and a note in his handwriting. See how easy it was to keep things from you? Come back, and I will give you everything. Selena contacted the cops, but the homeless man had already left, having most likely been paid in cash to make the delivery. Stefan arrived the next day with dreadful news. Alden had hired a Czech lawyer and was submitting documentation saying that I had abandoned our marriage. He told the court that I refused to return home with him and was having an affair in Prague. Stefan claimed Alden was developing a case that I was an unfit wife who abandoned the marriage to party overseas. Alden engaged a lawyer renowned for pursuing shady cases and distorting facts. Stefan informed me that if Alden convinced the court that I had breached the rules of our marriage, it may jeopardize my visa status. The next day, I strolled into my Czech language class and froze when I noticed Alden seated in my normal spot, speaking with my classmates about our wedding. He was telling everyone how we were working things out and how he had come all the way to help me on our reconciliation journey. My classmates looked perplexed as they stared between us, and I stood there at the doorway, unable to move or say. Mrs. Davina, our teacher, noticed my expression and approached Alden, suggesting he would be more comfortable in the advanced class down the hall. Alden is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers, hiring shady lawyers, making false theft claims, and now cosplaying as a supportive husband in Czech class. Alden shook his head and explained that he needed to stay close to his wife for support, reaching for my hand as I backed away. Two of my students, women who had become acquaintances in the previous weeks, surreptitiously rearranged their seats to create a barrier between Alden and my customary seat. I sat between them while Alden continued to brag about our love to anyone who would listen, his voice growing louder each time I refused to look at him. The session lasted 2 hours, with Alden frequently interrupting to ask me questions in front of everyone, pretending we were a happy couple. When class finished, I raced out first, but Alden followed me down the street, yelling my name until other students intervened. 3 days later, as I was heading back to my apartment, I heard screams and seen Alden on the ground outside my building, clutching his chest. Paramedics were already approaching, and Alden gasped as he realized his wife needed to accompany him to the hospital. I told the paramedics I wasn't going anywhere with him, and Alden sat up straighter and informed them that I was mentally ill. He accused me of abandoning him and refusing to help, despite the fact that he was experiencing chest pains as a result of the stress I had induced. Soraya appeared at her window above us and descended instantly, chatting to the paramedics in fluent Czech. She informed them about Alden following me for days, the restraining order process, and how he had stalked me. The paramedics glanced at Alden, whose breathing had improved dramatically since he understood I wasn't coming with him. They checked his vital signs and discovered nothing wrong, then left after warning him about bogus emergency calls. That night, I couldn't sleep in Selena's guest room, so I scrolled through old texts from pals back home on my phone. Half of them had ceased replying to me altogether in the last few months. Those who did write offered brief, thoughtful messages asking if I was all right, but nothing else. I saw a pattern in their messages. They'd all grown distant about the time Alden began telling people I was troublesome. He had been using them against me for months before leaving me here, setting the framework for his lie. My phone rang at 2 a.m., and it was Damien, Alden's brother, phoning from home about something serious. He stated he did some research after our previous talk and discovered Alden had been living with a woman named Nadine. Damien provided me screenshots from social media of Alden and this woman together in restaurants and in her apartment, calling one other engaged. The posts dated back 2 months, just when Alden was telling everyone that I had abandoned our marriage. I looked at the images of Alden laughing with his arm around this woman while I was sleeping on the shelter floor. The next morning, I showed everything to Karina at the legal assistance office, who immediately identified it as fraud. She began completing emergency papers with Czech authorities and called a lawyer in my own country over the bigamy scenario. Alden's legal situation had just become hazardous because he was claiming desertion while actively living with another lady. She stated that this changed everything about his allegations against me and could potentially result in criminal charges against him. Roland called me from the embassy that afternoon, requesting that my independent visa application be expedited in light of this new proof. He claimed Alden's dishonesty and abandonment were now documented, and I was eligible for immediate processing of my application. He cautioned me that once Alden learned about the legal issues he was facing, he would try to flee the country. 2 days later, I was in Selena's cleaning service office assisting with scheduling when the door banged open. Alden walked in with 2 hefty men, claiming they were investigators looking into my theft of his goods. Selena recognized the men as local thugs who were causing trouble at the pubs. Her husband, Henrik, moved to block the door, while Selena grabbed her phone and instantly contacted the police. Alden was shrieking that I had stolen from him, and these men were there to search the office for his belongings. The 2 men approached the desk where I was standing, but Henrik moved in front of them. Selena was communicating with the police in quick Czech, providing our address and describing the 3 males who were threatening us. Stefan came within 10 minutes, along by 2 other cops, and recognized the 2 men with Alden from previous arrests. They arrested all 3 for intimidation and attempted extortion, and Alden screamed that I was lying about everything. Alden lost control at the police station when he saw me give my statement to another officer. He began yelling that I was nothing before him, and would be nothing after him. His face was crimson with wrath. Several others at the station took out their phones and recorded him saying terrible things, as Stefan physically restrained him. The footage of Alden yelling at me while in custody was eventually used as evidence in various legal cases against him. 3 days later, they finally let me return to my flat, while Alden waited in a detention cell awaiting his bond hearing. My hands shook as I inserted the key into the lock, thinking about how he had gotten in before. Soraya was already waiting in the hallway with a toolbox and new deadbolts she had purchased that morning. She assisted me in changing every lock while telling me how Alden had knocked on every door in the building, hoping to find someone who would believe his claim about me being mentally disturbed. Nobody did. The elderly couple from upstairs came down to check on me and claimed they'd seen right through him when he appeared all worried. Even the building manager stopped by to say he'd previously informed the police about Alden attempting to obtain a copy of my key by claiming to be my husband who had locked himself out. While Soraya drilled the new locks into place, I realized my neighbors had been keeping a watch on my door the entire time I was gone, since there were notes slid under it instructing me to call them if I required anything. The next morning, Linnea brought me up early to meet with Karina, a specialist in recording abuse cases for court. We spent 6 hours in Karina's office reviewing every email, text and bank statement from the previous 2 years. Karina had a way of asking questions that made me recall things I had pushed down. Alden, for example, had been gradually withdrawing funds from our joint account for months before leaving. She showed me how to make a timeline on a large whiteboard, marking each episode with a different color marker. Red stands for financial abuse, blue for isolation methods, and green for gaslighting. By the end, we had covered the entire board with colors. That's when we realized Alden had been preparing this for at least 4 months. He'd opened new bank accounts, transferred assets, and even looked into apartments back home, all while telling me we were planning our future together in Prague. Karina photographed everything, and stated that the pattern of premeditation would be critical to the case. That evening, I was making coffee in my kitchen, when my phone alerted me to a Facebook message from someone named Nadine. My stomach fell as I saw her profile picture with Alden, his arm around her, from what appeared to be a party 2 weeks earlier. She'd sent a lengthy message indicating she'd just discovered Alden was married and was disgusted. She claimed Alden told her that I was his ex, who refused to sign divorce papers and continued to stalk him. She had believed him until she watched a news report about his detention in Prague. She had screenshots of their discussions stretching back 3 months, indicating he was dating her before abandoning me. She sent me everything, including images of them together at restaurants that I recognized from our bank bills, hotel receipts, and messages in which he called me insane and claimed I was holding him back. In one communication from the day after he left me, he told her that I'd probably be back within a week. Nadine was upset and wanted to help in any way she could. She even agreed to testify about his lies. Alden made bail the next day, on day 12 of Stefan's chronology, subject to a number of restrictions. He was unable to contact me, had to forfeit his passport, and could not leave Prague until the trial. Within 2 hours of his discharge, a lawyer arrived at my door carrying an envelope. I did not open it straight away, but when I did, it contained a settlement offer. Alden wanted me to accept €5,000 and sign a non-disclosure agreement on the abandonment. The lawyer stayed there waiting for an answer as I read 3 pages of legal terminology that effectively suggested I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. I urged the lawyer to go, and immediately called Stefan to report the contact breach. He said Alden was playing games, using the lawyer as an intermediary to avoid formally violating the no-contact rule. The following morning, I had to return to work since I still needed money to survive. Selena had arranged for me to wear a small body camera, which Karina had provided us, clipped inside my shirt pocket. Every time we arrived at a new house to clean, I'd freeze at the sound of the doorbell, tensing my entire body. Selena observed how I kept looking over my shoulder and decided to change our itinerary, avoiding unoccupied houses and schedule only apartments in crowded buildings. She parked where we could see the van through the windows and kept her phone ready to contact the cops. At one place, a man answered the door, and I nearly ran before understanding it was the owner. Selena had to take over talking to clients because my hands were too shaky to jot down schedules. She never grumbled, just calmly reorganized everything so I felt safer. On day 13, things worsened. Alden's lawyer launched a countersuit, saying I was the true abuser and that I was holding Alden captive in Prague with bogus claims to prevent him from returning to work. Nadine discovering Alden's detention through a news report appears to have come at a strangely appropriate time, exactly when proof is most required. Alden's chest-clutching performance for the paramedics has me wondering how many times he's used that technique before. The newspapers claimed I was killing his career and reputation out of spite. Karina had warned me about this, referring to it as DARVO, which stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. When confronted, abusers frequently attempt to spin a story, according to her. The countersuit alleged that I deceived the cops with phony tears and that Alden was the true victim. It even stated that I had plotted the entire incident to exact revenge on him for abandoning me. The arrogance of it enraged everyone in the support group, but Karina remained calm, claiming that Alden's desperate move revealed he was losing. Then something unexpected occurred. Damien, Alden's brother, arrived at my apartment complex, carrying 2 cardboard boxes. I hadn't seen him since our wedding and first didn't recognize him. He appeared fatigued from the travel and stated that he would arrive as soon as he learned what Alden had done. He'd packed boxes full of evidence, including Alden's true financial documents, which he'd hidden at their mother's house, printed emails in which Alden boasted about his plot to teach me a lesson, and, most startling of all, a termination letter from Alden's employer. Alden had been dismissed 6 weeks ago for stalking a female co-worker. Damien stated that he could not stand by and watch his brother destroy another woman's life. He had previously contacted Stefan and was prepared to testify. The brothers reunited at Damien's hotel the next evening. Alden had discovered Damien was in town and showed up shouting in the foyer. The hotel security cameras caught everything, including Alden grabbing Damien's shirt and pushing him against a wall. Damien remained calm and kept his phone recording in his pocket, while Alden threatened to ruin his life, tell their mother lies about him, and make him regret choosing my side. The security guards had to separate them, as Alden screamed that Damien was a traitor and that the family was meant to stay together. That was when Alden spoke the words that altered everything. He yelled that he'd just left me abroad to teach me a lesson, that I needed to understand my place, and that I should have returned by now. Damien's phone recorded every word in good audio. The security guards prepared a report and handed Damien a copy, along with the security footage. On day 14, Roland from the embassy called me early in the morning and asked me to come in immediately. When I arrived, he had my new visa ready, independent of Alden's sponsorship. He stated that the growing evidence had allowed them to expedite the procedure. He also provided me a package of material on filing charges in our own country for fraud and abandonment. Apparently Alden classified me as a dependent on his taxes while claiming we were separated, which was federal fraud. Roland had been cooperating with officials back home to establish a case. He said Alden was likely to face prosecution in both nations. That evening, when we finished our cleaning route, Selena and I sat in her small office and shared tea from her thermos. She told me she had been where I was 20 years ago, transported to the Czech Republic by a man who promised her everything, but then abandoned her with nothing. She'd launched her cleaning firm with the intention of hiring ladies like us, people who wanted work right away and didn't care about their backgrounds. She showed me a photo album filled with images of women who had worked for her over the years, many of whom had gone on to start their own businesses or careers. She said that her company was never just about cleaning houses. It was about giving women a chance to get back on their feet after being knocked down. The next few days were a haze of meetings and paperwork. Linnea's lawyer buddy called me frequently with updates on the case against Alden. She stated that prosecutors in Prague were working with officials back home to coordinate charges. Alden was facing serious charges for stalking, intimidating, and employing those men to intimidate me. Back in our own country, they were looking into fraud and abandonment accusations. The legal net was closing around him faster than I had anticipated. Meanwhile, Alden's financial situation worsened quickly. The posh hotel where he was staying called the police station and demanded payment because his credit card had been refused. His lawyer informed the court that he required more money up front to continue representing him. Alden attempted to access our joint accounts but discovered that I had legally frozen them while the investigation was ongoing. The expression on his face in court when he discovered he couldn't touch the money must have been something. Then Damien's wife called and told me some surprising news. She had been looking around on social media and discovered something huge. Alden's first wife, whom he had always claimed perished in a car accident years ago, was actually alive and living in Canada. Her name was Celeste, and she'd remarried and had children. Damien's wife had messaged Celeste carefully, and she was willing to discuss what Alden had done to her. The following day, Alden made matters worse for himself. Despite having to forfeit his passport as part of his bail conditions, he attempted to flee. Police apprehended him at the German border with a phony ID he'd obtained. That breach resulted in his immediate imprisonment pending trial. I observed from Linnea's lawyer's office as they confirmed his arrest on the phone. He was going straight to jail this time, no more bail. To restore my legal freedom, I needed to go to the embassy and fill out paperwork. Sitting in the waiting area, I realized that my hands weren't shaking as much as they used to. But I nevertheless scrutinized every exit and examined every face that passed through the door. Roland sat with me for a bit and explained that this was typical given what I'd been through. He stated the feeling will pass with time, but it was fine to remain cautious. 2 days later, Celeste and I spoke via video call. She appeared fatigued but resolute as she told me her story. Alden had done the exact same thing to her 10 years before. He had isolated her from friends and relatives, drained her inheritance of about $50,000, and then vanished when she began to inquire about where the money had gone. She had rebuilt her life in Canada and wanted to help me. She said something that stayed with me. She told me I was already stronger than I realized since I had survived him and was still standing. Alden's lawyer used a novel technique in court that even the judge found perplexing. He stated that I had planned everything to take Alden's riches and gain sympathy for immigration purposes. He claimed I had put Alden up to seem terrible so I could stay in Prague. The court genuinely asked him if he was serious, especially because Alden had just been apprehended with a fraudulent passport while attempting to exit the country. Stefan called to tell me they had discovered additional proof. Alden's laptop proved that he had been investigating stuff for months before leaving me. Since January, his browsing history included searches for how to strand a spouse overseas and abandonment laws in the Czech Republic. He had been planning this for half a year. The premeditation made things considerably worse for him. Throughout all of this legal nonsense, I continued to live my life. Soraya from next door began coming over in the evenings. I taught her some English words, and she helped me with Czech pronunciation. We laughed so hard when I tried to speak specific words. One night, I realized I hadn't laughed so hard in years. Really laughed. Not the phony, polite laugh I'd learned to give around Alden. I was creating a life that he never imagined I could have. The biggest break came when the two men Alden hired agreed to negotiate a deal with prosecutors. They disclosed that Alden promised them money from my claimed inheritance. The problem was that I had no inheritance. My folks are typical working people who cannot afford to leave anyone. The men have recordings on their phones of Alden explaining his entire scheme. He had instructed them that he needed to scare me so much that I would run back to him, desperate and shattered. He'd indicated that once I was back under his control, he'd have access to my family's money, which he'd made up in his imagination. The tapes were as clear as day, with Alden talking about making me so scared that I'd never try to escape again. The prosecutor's office spent 3 days reviewing everything. When they called me in on day 22, the lead prosecutor had a terrible look on her face. She spread out the evidence on the conference table and informed me that Alden faced substantial prison time for abandonment, stalking, intimidation, conspiracy, fraud, and attempted flight from justice. The recordings alone were sufficient to convict him. But in addition to everything else, she described it as one of the most powerful instances she'd ever handled. I sat there staring at the papers, photos, and transcripts, feeling neither glad nor sad, only empty and tired. That night, Alden's mother called me sobbing so hard that I couldn't hear her words. She continued screaming that she knew Alden was difficult, but prison would ruin him, and could I please drop the charges and return home? She acknowledged she'd always known he struggled with control, but it was just how males in their family were, and I should have been more understanding. I informed her as gently as I could that Alden's decisions had wrecked our marriage and nearly destroyed me, and I couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions. She hung up on me. The following morning, Selena called with news that made me grin for the first time in weeks. The embassy had approached her for a cleaning contract for all of their offices and residential buildings. They were thrilled with how she handled the entire situation with Alden, and wanted to work with someone they trusted. The deal was worth 3 times what Alden had charged her when he scared away the customer. 2 days later, I walked through the outdoor market outside my flat for the first time since Alden arrived in Prague. My hands shook slightly as I selected veggies, bread and cheese, foods I wanted to eat rather than those Alden would have approved of. Damien arrives with boxes of evidence as if he's giving the world's worst care present to his brother. Happy Karma Day, Alden. Here is proof that you are bad. I bought peppers despite his hatred for them, chocolate despite his claim that it made me fat, and wine despite his belief that women who drank alone were sad. The vendor smiled at me and offered some complimentary herbs. And I walked home feeling as if I'd gained a minor victory over the voice in my head that still sounded like him. The bail hearing occurred the following week, and Alden utterly lost it in court. He began screaming that the entire Czech legal system was working with me against him and that everyone had been paid or threatened. His lawyer attempted to calm him down, but Alden turned on him and fired him directly in front of the judge, stating that he would represent himself because everyone was against him anyhow. The judge quickly rejected bail and escorted Alden from the courtroom while he continued to shout about corruption and lying. I began teaching English at the shelter 2 days after that. Linnea had asked whether I was willing to assist some of the other ladies who were attempting to rebuild their lives. The majority of them were refugees or abuse survivors, like myself, and they required language skills to find job. The initial class consisted of only 3 women, but by the 3rd session, we had 12. Linnea approached me afterwards and said she had never seen someone go from victim to advocate so rapidly. However, I did not feel transformed. Instead, I felt helpful for the first time in years. Damien called me that weekend with news that made things even worse for Alden. He'd been checking through Alden's old credit card accounts to assist with a legal matter when he discovered he had opened 3 credit cards in my name before abandoning me. He'd maxed them out and never made a payment. The debt exceeded $15,000, and it included identity theft charges on top of everything else. Damien was apologizing for not realizing who his brother was, but I reminded him it wasn't his fault. The following week, I met with Karina to prepare for her trial testimony. She had me rehearse recounting my experience repeatedly without apologizing or downplaying what had happened. I kept saying things like, maybe I misunderstood, or perhaps it wasn't that bad. But she stopped me every time. By the end of the session, I could clearly state that Alden had abandoned me to break me, but I refused to break. 2 days later, I signed a new lease for my apartment with only my name on it. The landlord had been following the case in the local news and offered me a lower rent. He mentioned that his daughter had been in a bad relationship before, and he was glad to rent to someone who had the fortitude to leave. It was the first legal document that was fully mine since my marriage, and when I signed it, my hand did not shake. Yesterday, a letter arrived from a lawyer Alden had met in jail. The lawyer stated that Alden wanted to offer me everything if I dropped the allegations and told the court it was all a mistake. The letter violated the no-contact rule and added a new charge to his case. The prosecutor referred to it as a gift since it demonstrated Alden's continued inability to grasp or respect legal boundaries, even when in jail. 3 days later, the prosecution called to inform me that Celeste was flying in from America to testify. She had paid for her own flight and wanted to meet me before the trial. We met in a little cafe near Wenceslas Square, where she took out a thick packet of papers. She had emails, text messages, and bank records dating back 15 years that revealed Alden's pattern with her. He had done the same thing to her in 2009, when they were living in Boston, isolated her from friends, controlled the money, and then abandoned her when she sought to find work. When additional information arrived, the prosecutor was already working on the case. A woman from Germany contacted them after seeing Alden's name in the newspaper. She had dated him briefly in 2018 and filed a police report when he refused to stop following her. The pattern was now so obvious that even Alden's lawyer was uncomfortable reading it. My phone started buzzing with texts from family members I hadn't heard from in years. My sister Aireddit wrote to say she had booked a flight to Prague for next week. My mother called, weeping, stating Alden had been phoning her for months before leaving me. He told her I was unstable, and she believed him. She repeatedly apologized till I had to hang up. Stefan called 2 days later with news that made my stomach plummet. Alden attempted to hang himself in his cell with torn bedsheets. The guards discovered him in time and brought him to the medical wing. His court-appointed lawyer requested a psychiatric evaluation, stating Alden was experiencing a mental collapse. Some others in the support group claimed it was all manipulation, but I couldn't sleep that night. I was wondering if I had pushed too hard by pressing charges. Selena stopped by my flat when she noticed I wasn't eating. She sat with me, reminding me that Alden made his own decisions. She maintained his acts were not my fault, not the desertion, the stalking, or this, but I still felt terrible thinking about him in that jail. The psychological evaluation lasted 3 days, and the results helped me understand things better. The psychiatrist diagnosed Alden with narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial characteristics. His practice of abandoning and stalking women is likely to continue without strong action. It was not about me, Celeste, or the woman from Germany. It was all about control. And when we escaped his grip, he couldn't take it. The same day the report was released, another woman appeared at the prosecutor's office. Her name was Nadine, and she had been dating Alden just before his incarceration. She brought her laptop, and his search history was still preserved in the browser. For weeks he'd been looking up ways to teach his girlfriend lessons and make her miss him. She discovered her passport stashed in his flat after he was detained. She was meant to be his next victim. The prosecutor added her proof to the mounting pile. That afternoon, I received a letter from my old supervisor back home. She'd heard about everything through mutual contacts and wanted me to know there was a job waiting for me if I wanted it. The letter stated that they will cover my moving expenses and assist me in settling in. I sat there holding it, thinking I had options now. I could stay in Prague, where I had started a new life, or return home on my own terms. Alden's new lawyer attempted to argue that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. But the prosecutor showed all of Alden's preparations before departing me. The airline ticket he bought weeks in advance, the money he gradually transferred out of our joint account, and the apartment lease he signed back home before leaving. Every detail demonstrated clear thought and design, not mental disease. The court denied the insanity plea and scheduled the trial for next month. Aireddit arrived at Prague's airport 3 days later, and I went to pick her up. When she spotted me, she burst into tears and pulled me into the longest hug. I was speaking Czech with the cab driver, and she kept looking at me as if she was seeing someone new. She thought I looked different, stronger, like I had finally matured into myself. We returned to my flat, and she couldn't believe I had done everything on my own. The small kitchen, the plants on the window ledge, the work with Selena, and my support group buddies who constantly checking up on me. She kept telling me she was proud of me, and sorry she hadn't noticed what Alden was doing sooner. The next morning, Karina called to say the trial date had been set for next week, and I'd testify by video link so I wouldn't have to be in the same room with Alden. She had arranged for a victim advocate to accompany me during testifying, and we spent the following few days discussing everything that would happen. I was prepared, but the notion of facing him again, even through a screen, made my palms shaky. 2 days before the trial, Alden's mother arrived at my apartment building, and the security guard called to warn me. I went down to the lobby, where she was clutching a box containing Alden's childhood photos and what appeared to be medical information. She began screaming as soon as she spotted me and pushed the documents at me, claiming that physicians had diagnosed Alden with conduct disorder as a child, and that he was sick, not evil. I read the reports of him injuring animals and starting fires, and reminded her that being unwell did not give him the right to harm people. She begged me to dismiss the charges, but I remained calm and stated that the court would determine what happened next. My English class classmates astonished me on the morning of the trial by gathering outside the courthouse with signs proclaiming "Justice for Maren" in both Czech and English. Local media were there, photographing and interviewing the foreign woman who had been abandoned and rebuilt her life. Selena and Linnea stood with me as we watched the gathering swell, and I couldn't believe how many people cared about what happened to me. Damien was giving his deposition to the prosecutor inside the courthouse, and I could hear him through the door discussing the animals Alden had harmed as a youth. He recalled girlfriends who had suddenly departed town without explanation, as well as control routines that had existed for years. Damien's voice cracked when he realized he should have spoken something sooner as the prosecutor painted a clear picture of who Alden truly was. When the trial began, I watched on my laptop as Alden arrived by video from detention, appearing weak and worn but still smiling at the court. The prosecutor's opening statement described everything in detail, from desertion to stalking to hired goons. Alden continued shaking his head, as if none of it was true, but the evidence was there in black and white. When it was my turn to testify, I sat in the little room, with a victim advocate holding my hand beneath the table. I told them about finding his belongings gone and leaving a message saying I'd figure it out. I recalled the nights without food, having to rely on others for assistance, and how he laughed when I called crying. Why does Alden's mother come up suddenly with childhood medical records that she appears to have kept for decades? The timing is convenient, with conduct disorder diagnoses arriving shortly before the experiment begins. My voice only broke once when I talked about learning to survive and discovering strength I didn't realize I possessed. When I finished, the courtroom on the TV went utterly silent. Alden asked to cross-examine me himself, and the court agreed, which made my stomach turn. His comment, "Didn't I provide for you?" revealed his true nature. "Wasn't I glad you didn't have to work?" Each question made him appear worse, as I responded simply and truthfully about control and isolation. He became enraged when I refused to admit that I had been ungrateful, and began shouting that I was distorting everything. The judge had to urge him 3 times to calm down, before threatening to take him off the video link. Celeste then testified about her encounter with Alden and how he had done the same thing to her years before. Then Nadine explained all of Alden's falsehoods about me being insane and following him home, when in reality he had planned everything. The pattern was so obvious that even Alden's court-appointed lawyer appeared uncomfortable defending him. Alden began ranting that everyone was lying and conspiring against him, but no one was listening anymore. The prosecutor saved the finest evidence for last, showing Damien's taped phone call in which Alden confirmed everything. Then came the internet history, which included searches for ways to make someone disappear, and psychological torture methods. The 2 thugs testified on tape that Alden hired them, and showed them my photo. Finally, the prosecutor displayed Alden's phony passport with a different name, which he had been carrying when stopped at the border. Alden completely lost it, and began yelling that I deserved it, because I wasn't appreciative for anything he'd done. He claimed I was nothing without him, and would have died on the streets if he had not taken care of me. The court called for order, but Alden continued to rant about ungrateful ladies who didn't know their place until the guards cut his video feed. The judge delivered the verdict in less than an hour, and I watched on my computer as she read guilty on all charges. Alden received 4 years in Czech jail for stalking, intimidation, conspiracy to conduct assault, and attempted flight from court. After serving his sentence, he would be deported and face additional charges in his own country, for the financial crimes that Damien had discovered. I watched Alden's face break as the guards led him away, and something inside me let go of the fear I'd been harboring. The next morning, I met with a lawyer named Karina in a little office near the courtroom to sign papers to retrieve what Alden had hidden. She brought out documents displaying bank accounts he had formed without notifying me, and safety deposit boxes containing my grandmother's jewels, which he claimed had been lost. My hands shook as I signed each sheet as she recounted how the court ordered everything back, plus damages for my losses. The jewelry was more important than the money since my grandmother gave it to me before she died, and Alden had no right to steal it. When we were finished, I went out with copies of everything, but I felt empty rather than delighted, because getting things back did not erase what had happened. Alden's mother was waiting by the steps outside the courthouse, and I nearly turned around, but she held up her hands to signify she had no intention of harm. She apologized for not seeing what Alden was becoming and for failing to seek him treatment when the warning flags were present. Her eyes were red from crying, and she appeared older than when I last saw her at our wedding 6 years ago. I accepted her apologies but maintained my distance since some bridges cannot be mended, even with the best intentions. When I returned to my flat, I found my door covered in flowers and notes from neighbors in Czech and English expressing their pride in me. Soraya had placed a pot of soup outside my door, along with a note stating that dinner will be at 7 if I wanted company. The other neighbors had signed a card with small drawings and Czech sentences, which I was still learning to read. Elodie helped me carry everything inside, and we sat on my couch, reading each note as the soup warmed on the stove. 3 days later, I met Roland at the embassy to complete my permanent residency application, which included all fresh court records supporting my case. He presented me a paper outlining new rules for abandoned spouses based on my experience. My lawsuit would assist other women avoid the visa turmoil I experienced because Alden abandoned me without legal status. He shook my hand and told me that the embassy would expedite my application given everything I'd been through this year. A week after the verdict, I returned to Linnea's shelter to teach my English lesson, as if nothing had happened. A new woman sat in the corner, crying, and Linnea whispered that she had been abandoned by her boyfriend, leaving her with no money or Czech language abilities. I made tea and sat with her, explaining in simple English that she would get through this, even though it seemed impossible. I gave her the same advice that Linnea had given me. Take each day as it comes and find strength in tiny wins. When I told her my story, she squeezed my hand, and I recognized the fear I had felt 6 months before. That afternoon, Selena called and asked me to meet at a lawyer's office to sign partnership documents for the cleaning business. She wanted me to handle the English-speaking clients and bookkeeping while she handled the Czech side of things. We both understood how difficult it was to start anew, therefore the company would specifically hire women who were rebuilding their lives. We shook hands as we signed the contracts, and Selena informed me that my trial publicity had already resulted in 3 new corporate clients. 2 weeks had gone before Elodie packed her bags to travel home, but first we painted my apartment walls a bright yellow. Alden had always said that yellow was too cheerful and made him anxious. But now I could have whatever I wanted. We spent the weekend painting and hanging new curtains I had purchased at the market without seeking anyone's permission. Elodie assisted me in moving furniture exactly where I wanted it, and disposing of anything that reminded me of my previous life. The flat now felt like mine, rather than a transient refuge from my past. Celeste and Nadine wrote to say they were creating an online support group for women who had been abandoned abroad. They wanted me to be a moderator so I could share my story and assist others navigate the system that had nearly ruined me. I instantly typed my acceptance and spent the night composing my first piece about finding strength in the worst-case scenario. The support group already had 50 members from various nations, each with a similar story of being left with nothing. Spring arrived in Prague, and I walked across Wenceslas Square without looking over my shoulder for the first time in months. I went to my favorite cafe and ordered in Czech, which was growing better every week as I trained with neighbors. When I got the pronunciation correct, the server grinned and served me my coffee, which came with a small cookie. I opened my laptop and began writing my entire tale for the support group while visitors passed by my table. 6 months into my new life, I stood in the embassy, assisting a terrified woman in filling out emergency papers after her husband vanished. She inquired whether things had actually gotten simpler, and I told her that survival was not about regaining what you had lost. It was about learning who you are when you refuse to let someone else's nastiness destroy you completely. I gave her Linnea's business card and wrote my phone number on the back in case she needed someone who understood. Walking out of the embassy, I realized I'd accomplished something Alden never imagined possible without him. I had my own business, an apartment, and friends who genuinely cared about my well-being, rather than dominating me. The woman I was before would never know who I had become, as a result of experiencing the worst betrayal conceivable. My story was not about winning or exacting revenge on those who attempted to harm me. It was about understanding that true strength comes from refusing to give up when someone has left you with nothing. Alden thought dumping me in Prague would teach me how much I needed him, but it taught me that I never did.